I mean, free speech, we all know about First Amendment rights.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people that don't know about free speech. And you think about the social credit score in the online credit score in China and in North Korea, and you listen to after the Cold War ended, you have one version of history behind the Iron Curtain, and one other version of history here, and then you have a complete third description of history in Germany, where freedom of speech is limited to things that doesn't involve the Second World War, which doesn't exist in Austria and Germany because we don't talk about it there. We have freedom of speech. We had freedom of speech.
We have it, and they're trying to take it.
Unless your boss is of a different mindset politically than you, and you put a post up, you get fired. So you really don't. Well, we do, but
well, I guess in a place of work and whatnot, in the work environment, I guess that could be different. But basically, the whole crux of this conversation hinges on our right to free speech here in the States, which we're slowly seeing being diminished.
Yeah.
If it's not taken from us, it's censored online. And that's what that does, is that just promotes one-sided think that leads you to the direction that whatever ideals and whatever the propaganda is pushing towards.
Yeah.
We know that obviously in China and Russia, they control their speech to a certain extent. The only interesting argument I've heard about that in recent history was that they do that to prevent Western influence on their people. I think that's a more in-depth conversation because of the other things that they do along with it.
And I understand that, because if their narrative of the current war they're fighting in Ukraine is their narrative, and our narrative is different. We have several narratives out here, but they're definitely different.
Whatever narrative is most serving to our government.
Yes.
And its beneficiaries.
Yes.
So, and that's where people just latch onto. I mean, emotional decisions are generally never the best decisions.
No.
I think everyone knows that.
Yeah.
It's the more logical ones. People need to wait, see, and put the information together to come to a more rational.
And to do, but that's not the world we live in now, because people, they're not allowed time to reflect. They don't have one news cycle a day where they then can spend the rest of the day and next day deflecting on the media here.
We don't consume news.
No.
We do, but it's done at such a rapid pace. And I think the only other correlation I could see with this is, I mean, they say with like young children that watch YouTube videos with fast transitions, nonstop fast transitions, it creates like an anxiety, and which ultimately leads to like ADD.
That's very interesting, because we have now a young population with more anxiety problems than ever before.
Yeah.
To a staggering degree, because theoretically they have, or practically they have no problems, but they still have problems with everything, including social interactions. A lot of this started when the cell phone really became a thing, the smartphone.
Oh yeah.
The iPhone. A lot of these problems started there.
Yeah, so and to bring us back on track, basically our free speech in the U.S. is centered around our First Amendment, which was adopted in 1791. So that enshrines our free speech, our rights to press, assembly, and to petition the government.
Yeah.
And with that, I mean, there are other small nuances, not yelling something in a large crowd that could cause injury or harm to people, bomb in a crowded theater, fire.
And that's the one they always brought up when I would say something like...
People argue it in such weird ways.
Yeah.
It's so straightforward. But people want to take it to the fourth dimension somewhere, and they twist and turn it, and they, well, you can do this, and to me it's pretty straightforward what that means.
Yeah.
But to some people I've had conversations with, they want to twist and turn and try to make everything that. And
you run into the problem where with the use of common sense is, again, that's a problem there.
It's a superpower nowadays.
Superpower, yeah. The problem is when you say something like, well, the medical therapeutic that you might take may actually kill you, then they will come back and say, well, now you're causing panic that might cause harm by causing people to not take this medical procedure. And then a couple of years later, the statistics and the numbers are starting to show that you are actually correct.
Well, people are also afraid too of the. I mean, we're a very litigious society, unfortunately.
Yes.
So people can be, it's. I look at a lot of YouTube channels, unfortunately, as it's. They're still controlled to a certain extent. They can't say certain things. They know they can't. And then obviously the litigious portion of that being, they also can't offend certain companies. I mean, people, false DMCA strikes.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff that I was hearing about lately was coming out of Nintendo. Nintendo is highly litigious. This is way off topic, but they go after channels that just host people playing their games. They're very protective of their IP and their stuff to the point where they even go after their fan base for it.
It seems like free advertisement, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, I think they've made a name for themselves, so they feel they don't need it, but they've gone after creators.
It's not a good name because I didn't know that Nintendo still existed, actually. But
yeah, well, they do a lot of interesting stuff. It just, I mean, it only came to mind because it was the latest example that I could think of.
I would say now that it was to finish off the freedom of speech conversation, there must be, within democracies in Europe, there must be charters, or must have been within their countries, allowing for free speech, although that has now been eroded almost completely with the help of here and the UN and the EU and all those agencies that we have here that are all tying together to stifle the freedom of speech. But there must have been in other countries freedom of speech. Speaker's Corner in England, I mean, there used to be that sort of thing.
I mean, and then previously in past history, some of the things that you've heard of that were tied to information control and somewhat censorship of speech, from assassinations to book burnings,
which is
to in the U.S., with the the fear of communism, that people were being censored left and right because they thought everybody was a spy.
McCarthyism.
Yes.
The thing is, and after that, McCarthy had been slandered to the ground because he was seeing communist infiltrators, sympathizers, and spies everywhere. And subsequently, his documents have actually sort of proven that he wasn't entirely wrong. He was actually quite right on a number of the things that he pointed out. But history, again, it's funny how communists and that mindset always seems to get the final word here.
Yeah.
I'm starting to wonder if communism is not the one who won World War II, because they seem to be thriving better than peaceful democracies.
And you see this woke political culture that's just completely plowing through everything from, kindergarten, reading material and what they learn to the political, what people see in the political sphere. And it's with the LGBTQ stuff to I mean, just any bit of propaganda that is pushed that they want to become more
and it's almost exclusively pushed specifically like what Europe SMF was talking about, to divide the nation. Because you take a fringe belief, and I'm sorry, it is, because unless you indoctrinate enough kids with it, and then you end up having a childless world. But it is a design to take people apart. And when you raise young people, and you have why so many kids and teenagers have so many problems, is they are raised now being imposed with a belief system that runs counter to their human instincts and knowledge of who they are. You cannot keep telling kids that they are not what they are, because everyone, that without them being completely and utterly conflicted. Young boys are boys, young girls are girls. If you end up turning engaged one or the other down the line, when you grow up as an adult, you won't. But you can mess up kids when you start at an early enough age with very little input, which is happening. So now you grow up with all these completely confused and conflicted kids who are scared of everything because they are not even sure who they are.
Just corrodes society.
Yeah.
And it you know, what did they say? One of the destruction of the nuclear family was probably one of the biggest detriments to our society. But the way that they do it now is division.
Yeah, which is with the destruction of the new one of the African American nuclear family back in the 50s was one of the strongest social bonds in the country, and the leftists destroyed that by incentivizing them to, well, you don't need to be married. You don't need to. That was the beginning.
Marry the government.
Marry the government.
Don't marry somebody else. Just
specifically for who's actually trying to help you. But yeah, the family is the nucleus of the country, of common sense.
Yeah.
And again, common sense. If you teach people to believe something that's not common sense, their instinct will revolt, at least within them.
And that's what you're seeing predominantly now.
Yeah.
Is you're seeing this division, and they do it every day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what mainstream media news outlet you're listening to. They're doing the same thing. They're dividing by race. They're dividing by class. They're dividing by religion. They're dividing by political affiliation. Yeah. And I have gay friends who are being ostracized by the LGBTQ whatever community because they're not gay enough. Because they don't want to cut body parts of themselves or glue boobs on them. Can we just go?
It's like, that's what they say. It's like, no, we're not gay enough because we both want to keep our penises. Like, all right, sorry, I get it.
You know, and generally, it comes down to, and I'm fine with to each his own.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
The problem is they've now, it's not so much to each his own. It's you need to take and accept this, or else.
Yeah.
And that or else is done with a very stern warning. And then that's when you start to see the censorship. That's when you start to see, you know, some of these accounts go down. Some of these people lose their monetization. Some of these people, it's
you
insane.
have people in England who are in prison because they put on Facebook or Twitter that men are not women.
Yeah.
And it's simple. They go. And I don't know how this became a UN-EU globalist narrative, but that is the narrative that they are currently going with. So, and again, that's why the internet censorship has to become a thing. That's why you have to erode historical monuments and historical texts and references to history. That's where I started finding out that there were things I couldn't find online, or things that kept disappearing on me, or websites that kept going dark, or links that kept going dead, of things that I had saved because they're just gone, because I'm trying to research history and history keeps disappearing and keeps changing. Because if you don't have a historical mind, if you don't understand where you came from, you have no idea where you're going. Yeah. And that's what, in order to destroy, derail all these Western nations or America, you have to erode our history. Pull down the statues, destroy all the monuments, all the links we have to our history of who we were has to be destroyed, so the next generation won't be able to see these links and won't be reminded. So that's one of the reasons why this is happening.
And that's why, I mean, a good segue into the Wayback Machine. And obviously the Internet Archive, which is also known as the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
Which was just under attack by a self-proclaimed Russian hacker group. There's a lot of conflicting information with what this group has put out, but the importance of the Internet Archive is that there's a lot of information on there that has only persisted because somebody decided that they should have this nonprofit website that could archive material from years ago to now and host it for free for people to download, for people to use. unfortunately, that's presenting its own issues with some of the people that want to go after the Internet Archive, not just hackers, but like I said, litigious society, some of the bigger corporations that don't want their material on there.
But also, you can't pull up the past. Texts disappear, websites disappear,
Yeah.
people disappear.
And the timing for that right now with the Internet Archive, it strikes a lot of people as being very peculiar because of where we're at just before an election. And some of the information that people can go back and research on sites that may not exist on Google, they can be pulled up on something like the Internet Archive. So
now you mentioned a Russian hacker group, and it's interesting because one thing I noticed was, well, we had Glasnost, we had Putin was probably the right person for the job when he got the job because Russia was tearing itself apart with crime and corruption. He was a strong man. In the 90s, he was probably the right man for the job. I'm nothing pro or since he has his ideas of gems, but he's a smart, very, 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 very smart man. You can't deny that. But then Clinton or Obama was in office, and I remember Clinton with her ridiculous reset button with Russia, wanted to be friends with the Russians, and started blabbing about nuclear missiles or something to the prime minister on a press conference, and they all looked at her like she was an idiot. Here are Democrats reaching out, want to be friends with the Russians, until the very minute Donald Trump ran for office. And ever since that day, all of a sudden, Russia was the bad guy.
we need a boogeyman.
We need a boogeyman. And the Russia really wasn't a big problem until the 1916 election. Well, 1916 election was also a problem for Russia, but that's a different story. 2016 election, then all of a sudden, ever since then, everything has been wiped off on the Russians. And don't get this into the Russia-Ukraine war. I have friends on both sides, and I would really, really wish this never had happened, and it shouldn't have happened. That's a different topic. But the Russians really have they were turned into the whipping boy for every bad thing in the world was wiped off on the Russians. And we know all the Russian collusion story with Trump was all nonsense. And now you say a Russian hacker group.
This is why people have an issue with what this group is saying. Meanwhile, they're supporting the Middle East or things that are happening, or not supporting certain things that are happening in the Middle East. Sounds more like a politically driven attack.
That doesn't sound like what hackers do.
Exactly. But sounds more like a politically driven attack. And then their motives are somewhat misinformed because they say that they went after it because it's a U.S.-owned website. It's not. So
does hackers usually come out and take credits for what they've done?
They'll take credit.
Or have they taken credit for anything else?
But it's generally on the side of free speech, which is interesting because you're taking a site down that's preserving.
That doesn't sound. What politics exactly are these people in favor of? So these
they don't have any political. That's the weird part. They're saying they're not doing it only because the U.S. owns the website and they're opposed to the atrocities going on between in the Middle East, between Israel and it's
they're opposed to Israel, or they're opposed to the atrocities. Everybody's.
They're on the side of the stuff that they say just kind of doesn't really make sense.
Does it fit one political side more than the other? Who benefits?
Oh, who benefits? The people that don't want information researched or disclosed.
That's usually
that would be
usually not renegade hackers. They usually want to disclose information. Pretty much.
Generally, that's the idea.
Do we? Why do we
too much information?
Why do we think they're Russian? These people. I mean, this is pretty much just a couple of guys who've been around having a conversation about stuff that you should know in the most unstructured way. I'm sure this would be great for some people to fall asleep to. I can do an abbreviated version with key points so someone will actually learn and assimilate something. This was our way of just opening up to some topics and some points of conversation. that we really have thought about wanting to bring to you guys. Are we all screwed?
I don't think we're screwed.
Screwed adjacent?
So, somebody told me once that just on the larger scale, like, do you think there are more good people in this world than bad?
Yes, but if good men fail to do something, evil will succeed. And if good men are not informed that it's time to stand up, then they may do nothing. That was very philosophical, by the way. That was very good.
I think what we're seeing, or what we might be experiencing, might be just what some would associate with just a change of power. On a different scale that people aren't.
But I do think from all the things that came out of the flu season 4 years ago I think a lot of people have woken up to the fact that you cannot just blindly trust what you're seeing on mainstream media.
Yeah.
And I think that was I think there are people in the blog that think they can use these types of events to tie us all down, log us all up again, because it worked so well last time, and it did. You all complied, and Lord knows, not only everywhere in the world, you complied to being locked up in your house, not being allowed to go, and you damn well also almost elected every single politician who did it back into office of the next election. And that's to me the most terrifying, that you didn't punish the people who did this. But I think for the other side of that is a lot of people woke up to the point that we can't give you people total control.
And I think in general, just touching on some of this stuff, what I would encourage your viewers and listeners to do is don't take our word for it. Do your own research.
Yeah, do like we just did.
Think for yourself.
Yeah.
Break away from what the news is telling you, and just search independent reporting sites, different people that aren't reporting maybe exactly what you want, because people tend to look for what they want to find.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what Google is really good at giving people. So basically, just to think critically.
Yeah.
Think about the free speech aspects. Think about the censorship aspects. Your access to information, how you access information. If you were even aware about what the Internet Archive was, I suggest you go on the site and just browse it. An amazing tool if it's back up by the time this goes up.
Yeah, I use them a lot.
And even then, look at books that are historically sound.
Yeah. A
lot of older books are disappearing, and those are the things you can find on the Internet Archive. And social media. Although social media can be one heck of a place to converse, I wouldn't take everything too seriously. It tends to be a great place for memes, and to convey ideas.
Yeah.
And to get criticism.
But that is what free speech is about. Also, be able to take criticism.
And I think a lot of people are very quick to jump on current day Twitter, X, and sit there and say that Elon's a bad guy because Twitter is X, Y, and Z. Twitter is, to a certain extent, allowing free speech. I know a lot of people won't agree with me saying that, because there are a lot of users that were banned off of Twitter that Elon still hasn't restored some of their accounts.
But they were banned under the old management that wanted to shut up.
So now it's just a matter of them getting Elon's attention so that he could bring those accounts back. Whether that's the case or whether he just doesn't care to bring them back, I don't know.
One of the smears that I keep hearing is that Twitter's advertisers, and I hear this on mainstream media, of course, so that's why I don't believe it. But I will have you clarify that, there's a lot of sex trafficking and child trafficking and crime taking place on Twitter now as opposed to before. I'm not seeing him allowing for these things.
You would need information for that, but that historically, I would say in the past, Twitter might just be considered one big crime scene. You think about it with some of the current relevant popular cases.
Yeah.
How many of those movie stars, politicians, just celebrities use Twitter to communicate? There might be more information there than most people realize, and there may have been a reason for why they're doing what they're doing with Twitter. But that's all speculation on my part, just my opinion.
I mean, there's a reason why the Telegram guy was just arrested and hauled over in France for something. That there's another secure communication. Discord was just taken offline in Russia, which to the detriment of Russian soldiers, because they can't actually. They used to use Discord to communicate, including call-in strikes. Ukrainians do the same thing. There's always going to be a way for bad guys to communicate. I don't think you can single out Twitter and say we don't want to advertise because you have child molesters on there. Because if you look in the light of Elon came out in favor of Trump, he's thus a conservative. Conservatives have traditionally waged a war on sex trafficking far more than the right, and I know because I wrote books about this, and this is important to me. And one of the things that on the first administration under Trump was that he started shutting down any of the sex sites, trafficking sites, going after the gangs that was doing this. And traditionally, the people who always seem to get away with sexual misconduct are on the other side.
You saw a huge spike during his presidency of trafficking arrests.
Yeah.
So whether that's a coincidence or
I'm just saying, I don't think it's fair to say that Elon is facilitating these things.
It just tends to be one of those buzzwords that they're going to attach to the current problems that they're dealing with. So mainstream media is dealing with battling against Twitter or current day X.
Social media, which is taking
they
over
don't
from
like
mainstream
it,
media.
So they're going to attach buzzwords.
No, the mainstream media makes them less and less relevant.
Yes,
so you can find better information from independent.
We'll tell you the information.
God,
we will tell you.
Now you're screwed.
Think for yourself.
If I want to know something about electric vehicle and car sales, I'll look at the guy in England doing twittering about what he's buying and selling cars and seeing around him. I'm not going to look at the national website. If I want to hear something about crime against women in England or Germany or here, I would go look on websites where, I actually can't say I have, but I would go on websites where girls will talk about their security issues. There bound to be some, aren't there? I haven't actually looked. I would hope that someone of, say, teenagers or young women or women in general, that I wrote books on how to protect themselves, or would use websites or chats to communicate about how to stay safe or predators in the area or things like that. I would hope. We talk about the guns or tanks, or we have Discord set up for history, for this, that, the other. And, please, if there are any women's groups on a Discord or chat or Facebook that talks about women's safety issues in these countries, please let me know, because I would actually like to help, give them a thumbs up, applaud, whatever. I hope that there are women that are talking about the safety issues they have. That was a bit of a tangent, but I would hope somebody's using these to something good.
Well, just the takeaways from this is think for yourself, research and use some of these tools that are at your disposal, archive everything, and just consider the content moderation and basically this modern day book burning that we're talking about, and how it's being used to influence and push people to different extremes and change the dynamics of the political atmosphere and the socioeconomic atmosphere, and how that it's around everyone. Unfortunately, it's inescapable. You can't get away from it. Like we said earlier, everybody has a story of a friend or a family member that they're no longer talking to because they didn't vote the way that they wanted them to vote the last election, and they're now just
it shouldn't be.
It's insane. So
one piece of advice I will then also give as the end is, when I buy books, I do buy books, I look up the author to find out if he has a specific mindset, a political agenda with the history book that he wrote that would make me wonder if I could trust the information. Do the same thing about the journalists, or organizations, or fact-checking organs, the people you take information from online or TV. Look them up. Look up who's funding them. I know that's a bit of work sometimes. Who do they get the money from? Who are they supporting? Who have they supported in the past? Because quite possibly, if they are specifically tied to one or the other side, the information you're getting may not come down street the middle.
It's a good exercise to get used to.
Yeah,
because
like look up the source.
You know where your information's coming from.
Yeah. I mean, anyway, we'll be back with another rant about something related.
Sounds about right.
When take care, everybody.
My name is Tino Struckmann. I run Lost Battlefields. Every year, I travel around the world to try to bring you to all the most interesting historical military locations from modern wars and the World War II special projects, battlefields, forts, fortresses, and tunnels, everything else. Things you may not be able to see or go to yourselves. Please join me on Patreon or join Lost Battlefields through the website so you get access to all my files and my notes. It really does help, and like, follow, share here on the channel if you can. That helps too.